Welcome to the 2020 Greensteading Summit, presented by the Green Dream Project. This is a special series of videos featuring permaculturists, homesteaders, farmers, gardeners, and people dedicated to sustainable living. We thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. 5 years ago we moved to our 0.8 of an acre homestead, and in this area, which used to be a paddock, I created a half-acre food forest and vegetable garden. I've created this garden on a really tight budget. I've grown a lot from seeds and I've taken a lot of cuttings and divided plants so that I can fill out the borders and have more perennial plants. It's not the quickest way to fill a garden, but for us it was the most cost efficient. And although we're not 100% self-sufficient in our food, we're getting fairly close. I use raised beds in this area because, well, the ground was just so poor when we moved here. I needed to raise the level and create soil to be able to grow in. I've got 20 raised beds here of various different depths. These first 4 have perennials in them, so asparagus, perennial kale, strawberries and raspberries. Further down there I've got some Babington leeks, which are a perennial leek, and also perennial onions. When we moved here 5 years ago, I really wasn't very well, and I got round to using walking sticks. So developing this garden was really slow going, because if I needed to push a wheelbarrow, I could push it and then use my walking sticks to step forward and push the wheelbarrow again. It really was exceptionally slow going. And then as my health improved, the amount that I could do in the garden has increased. And for the last 3 years, I haven't needed those walking sticks. And I'm very happy just to be able to potter around the garden. And in the rest of these beds, I grow quite intensively, and I grow annuals, and I try to get 3 to 4 crops per bed per year. So stuff goes in and then comes out, or I've interplanted it. So lots of successional planting, lots of interplanting, and lots of polycultures right the way through. Very few beds have just one crop growing in them. These beans are the exceptions, prove the rule. There are the runner beans, and then there's a perennial cabbage here. And there are a few flowers at the base, and last year I put some chard along the bottom. But the reason for keeping this bed as just beans is because I grow these as perennials. So I grow them as climbing perennial beans, and all I do at the end of the year is cut these off about 6 inches above the ground, and I mulch heavily, and then I wait, and the next year up they come again. Now, not all of them come up every year. So this year, out of the 18 plants, or maybe it was 21 that I had in here, 11 came back up. So the ones at this end are annuals, fresh seeds sown this year. And I think you can see the difference between these slightly paler plants that hug the canes in comparison to these much darker colour, because they've put their roots much deeper down, so they're being able to access nutrients at a deeper level. And rather than being just 1 or 2 stems going up the cane, there are about 6 or 7 that came up out of the ground. So they're much bushier, much healthier plants, and they give us a bigger crop. This bed is a real mixed bag. Some more perennial beans and onions growing beneath them. This year I learnt that it's not a good idea to grow onions with beans, because apparently the onions give off something that can inhibit the growth of beans. Well, now I know that. I won't do that again in the future, or maybe I will. I quite like to have a big mixture of plants in any one bed. So there's the onions and beans, and I've also got some turnips and some perilla. This is really lovely. And we've got pigeons. And then there are a couple of squashes and some beets in here as well. Oh, this smells lovely. This bed is a really good example of how hard I work the ground here. It started the year with purple sprouting broccoli in it, which we can overwinter in a temperate climate. And once I'd finished harvesting that, they came out and potatoes went in. And I grew those as first earlies, so our potatoes we can grow as first earlies, second earlies or main crop, and that refers to really when you plant them and how long you leave them in. So I put first earlies in here in April. They sat in here for 12 weeks, out they came, and I've now got carrots and beans interplanted here, a couple of squashes at that end, and there's a currant bush there. And then I've got carrots and lettuce, and at the front there are spring onions, which I think are called scallions elsewhere, and also some radishes. And before we go into winter, a lot of these will be cleared. The carrots will sit in here for the winter and I'll harvest them as I need to, but I'll also put in some other brassicas into here, and I will cover this with netting. I don't need to net the brassicas in the autumn to protect against butterflies, but I do need to protect against ducks. I think you can hear them in the background. At the moment they are excluded from this garden, so they're in their enclosure over there, which runs the full length of the garden. They're allowed into the food forest at this time of year because I've finished harvesting the currants and blueberries, and if I didn't shut them out when I was doing that, they'd have them all. So they are in the food forest, keeping the slugs and the snails and the other little things that might attack this food, keeping them to a minimum. And then in late autumn and early winter, I actually allow them into the vegetable garden, and they can go through all the pathways. The pathways have all got wood chips on them, which this one has been replaced fairly recently. But I put it on in quite a thick layer, and then over a couple of years it breaks down, and once it's broken down I can scoop it up and put it onto the beds to increase the organic matter in the raised beds. I have the pathways in here quite wide because I want to make it wheelchair friendly, because you never know what might happen in the future. I grow using a no-dig, that's no-till method, and because I want to grow really intensively, I need to make sure that I have plenty of compost that I can add to those beds each time there's an empty space. So I have an awful lot of compost on the go at any one time. And what I did was I created a fence around the vegetable garden using pallets. These are all heat-treated pallets, and they go in a line around the edge, and then some come out at a right angle. And once I created that, I realised that it made these really useful bays. So I have an awful lot of compost bays surrounding the garden, which means that I'm never very far as I'm harvesting or I'm weeding. I'm never very far from a compost bin. In the central section of the garden, I have created what is predominantly a flower garden, and I really wanted to have something that was very ornamental because the rest of the site is quite utilitarian. But I also grow some edibles in here, but they're not for us. I grow quite a lot of brassicas out in the open, so not covered, not treated with anything, and I grow them just so that the caterpillar population can feed on those, they can reproduce, make lots more butterflies. And even though they're mostly cabbage butterflies, I'm really happy to support the butterfly population. Butterflies are food for bats and birds and our local hedgehog population, and I want to be able to support those as much as possible. And if that means having lots of cabbage white butterflies. Well, I'm okay with that. This area of the food forest is full of herbaceous perennials. So there are lots of raspberries and strawberries. This fantastic plant here is a Lycisteria formosa, and it's got lots of other names, but it's superb for feeding the birds, but the berries are also edible. And I've also planted fruit trees and shrubs and flowers right through this area. I'm really pleased with how mature and fruitful it is already. So there are lots of apples, there's some pears, a handful of cherry trees, quince, plums. I'm sure there's some more that I've forgotten. And then there are things like mint growing in the ground. It started off in an old tractor tyre, but it's made its way out of that and is now just barely growing across the floor, as are other herbs like fennel and lemon balm. And about 18 months ago, I started developing the last area in our garden, which is this lovely walkway, and then on this side is what we're calling the market garden. For the first 3.5 years, this area was home to our chickens, and they've spent their time turning over the soil and scratching at it, and they've been able to have any waste material from the garden. Now here in the UK, we aren't allowed to give our chickens kitchen scraps or anything that's been through our house. So all of those kitchen scraps go off, collected by the local authorities, and here it goes off to make biofuel. So the chickens have had all the leaves, all the weeds and everything like that all put in, and they've turned it over and turned it over. And I've also given them wood chips and the bedding out of their houses, and they have slowly improved the soil here. It is actually quite a big area for the number of chickens that we had in here, so they didn't have a small intensive space. I gave them the whole field area to run around in. They then got moved to another area on our homestead, and I slowly turned this into the market garden. And once again, I'm growing this as a polyculture. So on this side I've got sweet corn and squashes and carrots. Over here I've got beans and chard, and at the far end there are mixed brassicas and courgettes, which I think are called zucchinis elsewhere. And even though this is a relatively large space, I still want it to work as hard as possible for me. So this year is the first time I've grown in this space, and I planted overwintering onions. So the onions went in, and not long before they started reaching maturity, I planted in the sweet corn. So as I took the onions out, the sweet corn and the squashes were already in place and just ready to romp away. And at the far end, I've been growing potatoes in a no-dig, no-till style, by placing the tubers directly onto the ground and then covering them with a mixture of grass clippings and used chicken bedding that had been sitting around for a little while to mellow. And as the potatoes grew, I then topped them up with more of that mixture of grass clippings and chicken bedding. And I've just harvested those. I'm really pleased with the harvest of those potatoes. As much as possible, I try and include vegetables and trees. So these, this lovely tree and this one are rowans. I'm growing those for the berries for the birds in the winter. Just there is a silver birch. Now, I have recently learnt that you can make a drink from the silver birch sap, which is very popular in Sweden. So I'm looking forward to giving that a go in the future. And behind me is a small elderberry tree. They grow enormous here by the farm. We have one that is just so huge. The only way I can describe how large it is by showing you a photo of me standing in front of it when it's in full flower. This elderberry has only been in here for 2.5 years. It's already, I would have said, the best part of 10 feet high, and certainly 6 to 8 feet across. We have what Charles Dowding recently described as an oceanic temperate climate here in the UK. We're never too far from the water. It's a small collection of islands after all, and our homestead is less than a mile from the water. So we have that wonderfully mild climate that living near the coast can bring, but it's also extremely windy, so we get the coastal winds here too. I've been really pleased with how relatively simple it's been to just take my time and develop this garden bit by bit. And as I've improved the soil and put in hedgerows, lots of trees and shrubs, the diversity of the wildlife here has grown exponentially, and the harvests that we're getting from the garden are becoming more and more abundant. I haven't created this garden all on my own. My partner, Mr. J, has helped with all the heavy jobs and all the jobs that need 2 people to do them. And I've also had some help from friends who've moved wood chips and helped me create raised beds, and have planted trees, including the hedge that goes all around the property. And you can find out more about our story on my YouTube channel, Liz Zorab by the Farm, or at bythefarm.com.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to check out the other summit videos as well. They'll be available for a limited time on the Green Dream Project YouTube channel. Remember to check out the links in the video description for more information on our speakers and to find out how to get access to all the summit videos to watch anytime.